Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 70 of the podcast. This is a little bit of a different episode. I'm going slightly differently about making this recording for a variety of reasons, but in short, I'm going to try to keep it short, which is probably a surprise for most of you because I tend to go long. In these main episodes where I'm doing the talking, I'll try to go a little bit shorter so that it's more compact and more concentrated, hopefully. But obviously in the interviews that I keep on doing with my guests, it will go as long as they are willing to go because I really like these long form conversations. Now, today's episode is different because, it came about differently, and I'll explain that. I first wanted to title it something along the lines of, the dark episode or the depressing episode, something along those lines, but I guess that's maybe a little bit too much. So instead, I'll just call it Looking into the Abyss, which is perhaps very apt. Now, how did this all get started? Well, several weeks ago, and it was, I think, early September, maybe mid-September, one of my clients and I were talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan by the US troops. And I mentioned that it's been a week since the exit that I started getting the first horrible videos that were sent to me by people I know of what was actually going on. And that was mass executions, Afghanis getting kidnapped in broad daylight, put into the back of the trunk of a car, and then they were disappeared only to be found the next day, for instance, shot to pieces. And that's only the sanitized videos. There is much, much worse going on there right now. So I mentioned that, and I forget the reason why, but it came up in the conversation. And he asked a really pertinent question, which was, why do you watch those kind of videos? Now, my first response would have been a very glib answer, but I stopped myself and I said, it's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. I did. And I came up with an answer, which is part of the answer that I'm going to give you guys today. But on second thought and upon further consideration, I discovered there's maybe more to it than that simple answer. So let's get into it. Before we go on, obviously, you can support the podcast. Go to wimsblog.com/donate. There's a page there. If you want to make a one-time donation, that is also great. I mean, helps a lot. A bunch of you listeners have been doing that over the years, and special shout out to you guys. Thank you for your support. I think the best bang for buck is if you go to my Patreon, patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name, and then and again, all the links are in the show notes, which you will find at, guess what, wimsblog.com/70. It's the most bang for buck of anything that I offer online. The Patreon, there's a huge catalog of instructional videos and violence analysis and so much more. Hundreds and hundreds of entries there that accumulated over the years. And my patrons give me a lot of good feedback, but also this is the upside. If you want to ask guests questions, my patrons get the first shot at it. So as always, when I have a guest, I have a list of questions that I want to ask. And then for a bonus episode, I usually ask patrons, hey, this is a person coming on. What do you want to ask him or her? And the bonus episodes are often a lot of fun because then the gloves are off, so to speak. There's no censorship possible. There's no YouTube or any other platform that could get upset with what we say. It's private in a sense that it's on my Patreon. So we talk about whatever we want to talk. So if you want to ask questions that way, and I got a bunch of really interesting guests coming up, some pretty big names if everything works out as well, that'd be great. So head on over and support the show and enjoy everything that is there content-wise. So that's it. Back to the main topic now. There are different ways that I can approach this question of why do I watch videos of extreme violence like that? There are varying levels of answering that as well, meaning at a very low level, I guess it's part of who I am. And to illustrate that, I have to go back to the very beginnings when I was a little boy. I was always interested in information that was, let's say, off the beaten track. It was going to the library. I would head off straight to the adult section and disregard all the comics and children's books and just go look at all the stuff that was over there. And then I'd read books about science and technology and so on. The paranormal section, I always found that fascinating. So I'd look into the stuff that normally, the kids my age weren't really interested in. And I remember at times that one of my parents needed to be there for me to loan out some of the books because the librarians were like, what is this kid doing with that book? He's way too young for that. I'd read it anyway. Probably didn't understand much of it, but I did read it because it was interesting to me. Same thing. I'm sure I drove my parents crazy at that time. They never mentioned it, but for instance, I would read a dictionary. We had this really big multi-volume dictionary. It's called the Dikke van Dalen, which is here in Belgium, which is like the main best-known dictionary. It's like, the one everybody uses. And I would look up words. I would read them. I'd read words that just for the fun of it to learn new stuff. And basically broaden my horizon. But one of the most fun things about that dictionary is that it had a special section in which you could read different kind of things. There was a big part on mythology, the different mythologies, mainly Roman Greek, and also a lot of old sayings in English, in French, and in Latin. And these were old sayings that were obviously, a little bit also off the beaten track because they referred then in the explanation, like, right, this is coming from this and this incident, or it refers to this and that. So a lot of ancient knowledge was passed on that way. Same thing, I would read encyclopedias as a kid. Now, given that it is 2021 as I explain this, there didn't used to be a Wikipedia for all the younger listeners out there. Wikipedia didn't exist. We had something called encyclopedias, which was large books, usually multi-volume, that would hold a lot of information about pretty much any topic. So we had a 5-part one, and I read it cover to cover, each volume. And again, there was all sorts of information there, and I found it all fascinating. Mainly in part because I wasn't supposed to read it. I wasn't supposed to be interested in that. Now that made me, to this day, I think it helped me keep more of an open mind than I would have had if I didn't have that interest from a very early age. So this kind of prefaces what I want to say next so that you know where it's coming from. So when I was about 15 or 16, I read 2 books by Fernand van Hemelrijk, who is a Belgian author. And these are old books. They were published in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. And if you went to law school in your first year, you had to read them. And one of them was called Ellendelingen voor galg en rad, and the other Misdadigers tussen rechter en beul. Now that translates more or less into the first one, Miserables between gallows and wheel. And wheel is the breaking wheel, which is one of the execution methods from the Middle Ages. And the second one translates into Criminals between judge and executioner. Now these 2 books were mostly covering crime and punishment, the legal system from, let's say, if I'm not mistaken, the late Middle Ages until like 1800s, 1900s. I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure anymore because it's been so long since I read them. And if you know anything about these topics, you know that the justice system way back in those days was very, very different from what it is today. What was acceptable as far as a legal defense was very different from what is today. You could claim that an angel talked to you in your dream, and that was a valid legal argument in some cases. So that's one aspect of it. Hard to believe maybe for some now, but that's how it used to be over here in Europe. And then we get to the punishment. The forms of execution, the forms of torture that existed were horrible. Like the breaking wheel was a big wheel that you were tied onto, kind of like the Vitruvian Man, arms and legs spread, and they would take a hammer or an iron pole, break every bone in your body twice, and then strike a blow to your heart to kill you. That was one execution method. This is by far one of the least horrible ones that were in that book. That left an impression. I obviously was very much appalled by discovering all that. And I had some notion, but it wasn't explained. That was the first time it was explained in such a clinical, detailed way for me. And it was an eye-opener as to the violence that has existed throughout the ages and exists today. So for me, I started having this interest on the one hand in, again, information that was beyond my years, normally speaking. And particularly when it comes to violence, discovering that there's this huge world out there, this dark and scary world of violence, where there are extremes that in the life that I was leading at the time, they were not a part of it. There was violence, obviously, but not those extremes. So that's one aspect of the answer to why do I watch this stuff. Now, another aspect is, I started training. I had some experiences both in full contact fighting, working as a bouncer, some other stuff that I don't really intend to go into all that much. And that was a continuation of discovering what violence was like, but from a first-hand experience. Now, that obviously is different, because knowing about something is one thing. You can read about it, it's one thing. But if you experience it, that's a completely different dimension. It's radically different. I really can't put it well into words other than trying to find comparisons. And there's a good comparison that Peyton Quinn once made in one of his books. And he said, look at violence and training for violence. Now, what a lot of people do is, if you compare it to swimming, learning to swim is like, right, so you look at the water. The water's over there. Could be a swimming pool, could be a sea, whatever. It's over there. You look at it. I'm going to teach you how to swim. So lie down on the floor and move your arms and legs like this and that, and you learn different techniques and you perfect them and so on. Sure, you get a good understanding of what is needed to not drown and swim when you fall into water. But everybody out there listening, if you know how to swim, you know that this is not how we learn to swim at all. At all. It doesn't work really well. Imagine that this is how you teach children to swim, and then you drop them in the water and like, okay, you know what to do, go for it. There would be many casualties and many outraged parents and lawsuits, so that's not how it works. But it's what I like to use then as a comparison is that the experience you have practicing your swimming technique on dry land, lying on the floor, lying on a table or what have you, and there are actually there is some equipment that is being sold right now. I saw it recently where you have this cable system that you have to lie down on some sort of table, and then you attach the cables to your arms and legs, and you make swimming motions. Sure, I mean, it's a workout, but that's not swimming. If you learn it like that, and then you get dropped into the water, it's a dimension apart. It's just not a little distance apart, both things. They're not a little bit different. They are so widely different that it looks like you just stepped into another dimension where everything is different. Yes, you have some basics, you have some techniques, but just from the abstract application of the technique on dry land into the dynamic, chaotic environment that is water, let alone sea, let alone sea during violent weather and a storm. I mean, those are dimensions apart. And the same is true for violence. And I think that is maybe another aspect. If you experience certain kinds of violence, you look at it differently. And you look at the world differently. You also live your life differently. So that all makes an impact on a person if you have some of these experiences. So that's another part of the answer for me of why am I looking at those videos. Now here's another one. There are many aspects to violence, and certain of the aspects are rare at first, depending on where you live. Like depending on who you are, where you live, what part of society you're a part of, and so on. You will not encounter certain aspects of violence and others a lot more. That means that you might never discover that there are certain extremes that are commonplace for a lot of folks. But because you don't live in that part of society, for you it's just an abstract. You hear maybe about it on the news, but then it's like a 1 minute soundbite on the radio or a 1 minute segment on a news show, and then it's out of your life again. For other people, it's daily life. So that is one aspect of that. The other aspect is, as time goes by, societies change. And your situation might change. You might go live somewhere else. You might go have a spot of bad luck and have to go into some of the lower classes of society. I don't like to use the word class. I think it's overused, but you get what I mean. One of the lower levels of society is maybe a better way to put it. And you end up there, and all of a sudden you are confronted with the kind of violence you're not used to. It's different. It's more intense. It's more regular. There's a lot of it. So you have to deal with it. And societies also change as a whole. For instance, when I grew up, there was no Mexican cartel activity in Belgium. There is now. We've got meth. Fentanyl is also here now. So a lot of the things that were unheard of, except for in movies and TV shows, are now a part of the country that I live in. Now, if you know anything about the type of violence that the cartels like to do, then you know that it's on another level. It's very different from what a lot of even the hardcore criminals here are doing. And there are some really hardcore ones over here. Don't mistake me for being oblivious to that. But the point is that it's a different aspect of it. It's a different kind of violence. And I'm not saying that one is better or worse than the other. I think it is fair to say that one is a lot more intense. Here's the thing. If you don't watch this stuff, if you don't follow it, you don't know about it. You don't know how close it is to you. You don't know what the consequences might be of either engaging into some certain conflicts. You also don't know what to do if, for whatever reason, you are either involved in a certain situation or it happens right where you happen to be and you don't know how to handle it. It's all easy when you watch it in the movies. Then the hero leaps into heroic action and saves the day. Real life is not like that. So that is not a reason why it's, I think, important to keep track of these kind of things. Now, here's another aspect of why I watch that kind of stuff, and it is that it teaches you about mindset. This is one of the most difficult things I always find to teach people is mindset. Is let's say a psychological toolbox that you need to develop to survive certain kinds of violence and be able to use certain kinds of violence in self-defense. And I think mindset is often poorly used in conversation and to discuss certain things. So I like to compare it to a toolbox, skill sets and tools that you need to have, psychologically speaking, and they work together. It's not one thing. When we talk about mindset, or at least when I talk about mindset, I don't mean one particular thing. I mean a combination of different tools and skills that you need to be able to do. For instance, not freak out when violence happens. And I'm not even talking about freezing or not freezing. I'm talking about, for instance, what happens often with people for whom violence is outside of the realm of possibility in their minds, is that they get outraged. And instead of overcoming their outrage and seeing the danger they are in, they allow themselves to express that outrage in various ways, and they end up seriously hurt or worse. Or people they care about suffer that fate. So if you by simply watching videos of people acting violently, of all kinds, again, all the different facets of violence, from very mild to very extreme, it teaches you about the mindset you might need when you are confronted with this kind of stuff. And like I said before, societies change. Look back wherever you are. Look back 20, 30 years. Tell me it hasn't changed. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. Now then move. Move to a different city. Move to a different part of the country. Move to a different country. Move to a different continent. See how things are there. You might be surprised that suddenly there's a type of violence that you didn't think, that you thought was extreme, that is actually pretty low level for the people living there. And even if you don't go living somewhere else, you might be on a holiday, take a trip, go on a vacation, travel and so on, for a variety of reasons, and be confronted with that kind of stuff. So the more you close your eyes for that, the more I think you are in danger. So, because you can't understand that not only what kind of mindset you need to survive that, but also that there are people who have a mindset in which these extremes or engaging in violence for these, what you think are perhaps stupid, silly reasons, that in their mind, that is perfectly valid. There's nothing wrong with that. So by exposing yourself to such videos, it is undeniable that such mindsets exist, both for people engaging in that kind of violence and for you and others who want to be able to survive it. It's proof positive that it exists. Because there's not just examples of people engaging in extreme violence, but you can also find plenty of examples of those who refuse to be victimized by it, fight back or escape, and so on. But to be able to do the latter, you have to have that mindset. You can't be staying in the outrage phase or in the I can't believe this is happening phase. You have to take action. And you have to understand the extent of the danger that you're in when things escalate to that point. How can you do that if you don't know about it? There's a final reason I want to mention, and that's this here. It's this is throughout my life, and mainly I learned this as I got a little bit older. I am extremely opinionated. I have very strong opinions, as you guys might have noticed over the years. I try to be fair, but I have very, very strong opinions about certain things. So it's dangerous, especially as an instructor, as a teacher, as an author, as a what have you, that you kind of fall in love with your own bullshit. You believe your own hype. And it's very easy to fall into that trap that you think, well, I know what this is like. So that is one of the reasons why I keep on doing, for instance, violence analysis videos on Patreon, which is I look at CCTV footage or cell phone camera footage of actual violent situations, events, and then analyze them. And that is one way, by continuously trying to analyze them, trying to learn, discover new aspects and how to deal with it, and then try to pass that on, ask for feedback and so on. That's how I try to keep an open mind. That's also why I keep on reading, watching other instructional videos, training with other people when I can, and so on. Because again, it's so easy to believe your own hype. It's very, very easy to dismiss criticism that you receive and believe that all the praise you get is that you deserve that and that you're always right. You're not, though. And I've written publicly about that, is that it's I've had plenty of times over the years where I was proven wrong about things that I very strongly believed in. And sometimes those were painful lessons, but more often than not, it was just very clear, like, okay, I was flat out wrong about this. And I learned from those mistakes. What I try to do, I'm well aware of the fact that I might not even recognize it when I don't do it. But what I try to do is keep that in mind, that I am fallible just like everybody else. And whatever I think now, I have to stay open to change, and open to change my mind and to new information, and to learn, to keep on learning. There's a good example of that from books is, if you ever read Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, it's a good book. It's old now, but it's a good book. And again, it's about a man who becomes a vampire in his life. And what the older vampires would do is take a companion and have him stay with him for a long time. But it would usually be a younger person born in that age, so that they could stay connected to that age, stay connected to the times that they were living in. Because if you're several hundred years old, you grew up with very different mindset and set of experiences. Society was radically different and so on. So you become out of place. You become an anachronism if you don't learn how to connect with changing times. And in the theoretical aspect of those vampires, because they're centuries and centuries old, that would be even more important, because it would be very easy for them to completely fall back to what they thought what society was like when they were young, and all of a sudden it is not anymore. It's so radically different. Imagine that happening to you as you get older. I'm closing in on 50. Next year I'll be 50, so I spent a fair bit of time on this earth already. The world has changed so much over the years since I was a young boy. And it's changing rapidly, even more rapidly as before. So it's extremely easy to get stuck in this mindset that you had when you were younger, that may have been accurate then, but isn't anymore now. Or if you stop learning, you think that the information you have is accurate and is unchangeable. Eventually, events will, catch up on you, and you'll discover that, we actually advanced a little bit with the science on this and learned that you were wrong. For instance, I just read a study about delayed onset muscle soreness, which is when you work out that you feel sore afterwards. That apparently there's a good case to be made now that it's not really the muscles that are causing the soreness, but the connective tissue. So that's its fascia. It's not muscle tissue that is causing it. And that is a radical departure from thinking that it's about muscles. So the implications of that will follow if these studies can be replicated and confirmed that it's actually that and not muscle tissue causing it. For years, I've been talking to clients about DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, about, okay, this is what happens after you train hard, especially in the beginning of your training. This is how you can handle it, blah, blah, blah. And now we have to recalibrate that, because whatever I said that worked or was possibly going to work to handle the soreness, well, if it turns out that it's not muscle tissue related that much, then maybe a different approach to handling it is necessary as well. And this is just something I read like yesterday or 2 days ago. After decades and decades on and 27 years of being a personal trainer, talking about muscle soreness in the way that I just explained. So that's why I keep on trying to stay up to date in my professional life as a personal trainer, to know what's going on in sports science and so on, to avoid being this anachronism that is talking about stuff that is just completely irrelevant, because the time moved on and so did the science. And this applies in spades to violence. For me personally, that is something that I try to avoid, is ending up in a position where I'm just saying stuff that I used to say always, and I never really questioned anymore. Then all of a sudden I've discovered that, wow, the entire world moved on, Wim, and you stayed here navel gazing, and turns out that now you're wrong. And it's not about ego, it's just that, I think that is the minimum that you have to try to do when you teach, is that you, at a minimum, try to stay up to date. And that is one of the main reasons why I continue to watch these videos, so that as the world changes, as violence changes, that I can change with it, so that when I teach something, that it's not bullshit, that it's not irrelevant, that it's not, yes, well, that worked 20 years ago when you were living over there, but now that's not how things happen. So all of that said, I do have my limits. There are things that I don't watch, that I find, no, thank you. I won't watch that. I've seen plenty of horrible things, from torture to mutilation to what have you. I'm not going to, list all the horrible things that I've seen, but there are certain things that I refuse to watch. Why? Because, well, I don't need to have that in my nightmares. I think that's a good way to put it. Now, in closing, do you have to do this? Nobody has to do what I do. This is my life. This is who I am. This is what I do professionally speaking. So I'm not saying to everybody like, okay, do the same thing I do. On the contrary, you make your own decisions for your life. You have to decide where your threshold is, that, okay, I won't go beyond that. Because some things you cannot unsee. You will never forget them. And they're always going to be in your mind's eye. So step carefully if you go down this route. Because then it comes to kind of the title of this episode, Staring into the Abyss, is in not necessarily all, but many of these videos, you're looking at somebody who loses his life, often in a horrible way, which makes us think about losing our own life and the fragility of human life, but also the immutable fact that one day it will end, and you might not get a choice as to how it ends. Most people don't. And that is an extremely uncomfortable truth for the vast majority of people. out there. Many of you listening to this, you know who you are. This is something that I struggled with when I was a young boy. And as much as anyone can, relatively young, came to some sort of a conclusion as to how to handle it and how to look at things. And accept, again, as much as anybody can, the reality of life ending and living my life accordingly. But I know that a lot of people don't do that, and they prefer not to think about it at all. So when they watch these kind of extreme violence videos of people dying, torture, execution, and so on, it's a 2x4 across the head. It's just reality smacking them in the face really, really hard. And then all of a sudden, they are confronted with something that they prefer to push away. So, and that is why I think that a lot of people don't want to do this kind of research is one way of explaining it. Or at the very least, look at it and be aware of it. And that is fine. If that's you, I am not criticizing. I'm not faulting you for anything. I'm just trying to explain why this happens so often with people. And then they look at somebody like me who looks at this kind of stuff, and they look at me like, what kind of freak are you? And I'm like, well, unlike you, I've spent my time staring into that abyss, my own, whereas you are actually denying that yours actually exists. Okay, it's good for you, but that's not me. I'm in another headspace. So, and again, not criticizing anybody, but I understand why people don't understand why I watch those videos. And in this episode here, that's what I want to talk about and explain my reasons a little bit more. There's more, but that is personal and none of your business. But the main parts I covered now. So that said, once again, I will caution you. If you think like, Wim, this is awesome, that's such a great idea. You know what? I'm interested in self-defense and all that, and I want to escape from the fear of my mortality. Okay, let's dive into this head first. Hold your horses, young man, young woman, or older person, regardless of what your age is. Don't just dive in. It's not how it works. Be careful. Like I said before, certain things are going to be so hard to watch and you will not forget them. And there's another difference between video and video with sound. There are certain screams that you cannot unhear, certain tones of voice that you don't know a human being can make. And again, that is far removed from actually being there and actually experiencing it, obviously. But if it is the closest you can come to it for many people, but it's not innocent at all. So it will stain your soul if that is an expression that makes more sense to you. So be careful. But as a middle ground, I would offer this, is that instead of diving in head first, I would suggest when you hear about something like this on the news, or you read an article in a newspaper about this, or you see a video passing by, you don't have to analyze it to bits and learn as many lessons as you can from them. But don't ignore its existence either. Don't stay just with the outrage and the horror and the repulsion that you feel when you watch that kind of stuff by accident. See if there's something there that you can take away and help you focus on your self-defense. Even if it's only, I don't want this happening to me, I need to train harder. Or, if this ever happens to me, I'm going to fight like hell to survive this and to escape. Or anything else that you might find is a valuable lesson. But simply more than just filing it away again to the back of your mind so you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to do it every single time. And God knows there are on social media and on the internet, there's so much video material out there that is horrible to watch. So it's not like you'll have a difficult time finding it. But so you don't have to go looking for it constantly. But if it does happen, every now and then, take a moment to see that there's a takeaway there for you, even if it's just what I just explained, and then move on with your life and your trading. All right, folks, that's it. I hope I didn't depress you too much, because I know this kind of stuff is it's sometimes uncomfortable to listen to. But if anything, I try to be truthful with my podcast episodes and leave you guys with something that comes from the heart and the mind, as opposed to search engine optimization stuff, content, social media influencer kind nonsense, and so on. That's not me. So every now and then it gets dark in here. All right, that's it. As always, go to the show notes for any links that I might have. And I also, as always, appreciate your support and the time you put into listening to the podcast episode. And I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.